Welcome to Not Good Enough Stuff. I'm Mary Beth Fox, licensed professional counselor, and every week we'll question the messages planted by family, society, culture, and life experiences that shaped your identity and became the voice in your head. We'll explore how you got where you are, why you learned to see yourself the way you do, and call bullshit on the messages that were never true in the first place. Because who you are and who you were shaped to be are not always the same. You will learn ways to begin returning to your true soul identity. Welcome to the very first episode of Not Good Enough Stuff. I am genuinely glad you are here. Whether you found this podcast through social media, a friend, or by accident, I hope this becomes a place where you start questioning the messages about yourself that you never chose to believe. If you only listen to one episode of this podcast, I hope that it is this one. Everything we're going to talk about in future episodes builds on what I'm discussing today. And that is that the voice in your head, that inner critic, is not something that you were born with. So let's talk about that inner critic, that negative self-talk. It is what I call not good enough stuff. So not good enough stuff is a culmination of all of the messages, the implicit and explicit messages that you've got throughout your life, beginning in childhood, that said you were not good enough. Could be like, I'm unlovable, I'm not attractive enough, I am, not worthy of love, I'm too much, I'm not enough. I could go on, but I'm willing to bet that you already have some of these kind of going on in your mind right now because you know you're not good enough stuff well because you listen to it and you hear it every day. And I will also say this. I think that not good enough stuff is a universal feeling. Everybody in the entire world has felt not good enough at some point in their lives. And if they tell you they haven't, I'm going to call bullshit because that is simply not true. But if they say it, either send this podcast to them or just let them be where they are because they're not ready to do the work to acknowledge these difficult things. So if you were not born with your inner critic, not born with not good enough stuff, then where did it come from? Well, I think it can even begin in the womb, but that's a topic for another day. But let's go with childhood. It comes from childhood, from family, society, culture, life experiences, and sometimes even religion. We get all of these implicit and explicit messages from a very young age of who we are supposed to be and how who we are is not good enough, and who we are not supposed to be, and comparing us to other people and letting us know all of the ways that we are not good enough. So think about some of the ways that you tell yourself you're not good enough now as an adult. What are those? Think about them. Is it that you're not successful enough? Is it that you don't do enough? Is it that, you are not the kind of parent that you think you should be? Is it that you think you're a failure? Is it that, all of these different things that the foundation and what's underneath is that feeling of not being good enough? You were not born with those. They came from the things that I named: family, society, culture, life experiences, and sometimes religion. And so how do you get to where you are then with this inner critic full of not good enough stuff if you weren't born with it and it came from these others? Well, when you hear something over and over and over and over, that sticks in your mind and you begin believing all of that. And when you believe something, even when it is not true, it's like you can't see that it's not true. You believe it to be true. And when you believe these messages from family, society, culture, and life experiences, when you believe that those are true, that then becomes your voice, the voice that you're telling yourself, your inner critic. And when it becomes your voice, then what happens? Well, it then becomes your identity. And your identity, or supposed identity, because it's not your real identity, but that supposed identity shapes every single aspect of your life. It affects the relationships you are in, how you allow people to treat you in relationships. It allows you, it teaches you what you deserve. It teaches you, you know, how you're supposed to show up in relationships. It affects often the career that you choose, whether or not you go for the career that you want because maybe you shouldn't. You're not good enough, right? That's what the inner critic's telling you. Or maybe, like for me, it tells you that you should go for this career that society, family, and culture says would mean that you're, successful. I found myself in a career with pharmaceutical sales because I was told that was a prestigious career. I was told that that would mean I was successful if I had that job. I was told that people would respect me, that, I needed to make all of this money because that would make me happy. And guess what? When that became my identity, because of what family, society, and culture told me, it also came with something else: severe depression. Because I thought I had to have this life because that's what family, society, and culture had told me. But it was so far from my true soul identity that I was depressed because I wasn't living authentically. But, if you look from the outside back then, people would have been envious of me. I had enough money to travel, go overseas. I had enough money for, a private kickboxing trainer. I, had a nice home, all of these things that made it look like I was happy. And I was not. So you're not good enough stuff, that inner critic can also affect what you decide to do in terms of whether or not to have a family. It can determine even how you dress, because you should dress this way or you shouldn't dress that way. I know I fell victim to that for many years. I have bright curly red hair, but society taught me that, to be a pretty white girl, I was supposed to have straight blonde hair. So I straightened my hair for many years and I piled on 500 pounds of makeup every day. And that was not me either. And so I learned how to begin questioning all of these voices. And that is how we begin healing not good enough stuff. Those feelings of not being good enough that turn into our inner critic. So what you do is when you hear that inner critic going and going and going and telling you all the numerous ways that you are not good enough, ask yourself, where did this come from? Whose voice is telling me that? Now, if you start thinking, well, that's my voice, because I'm not good enough, because, I should have straight blonde hair, or I, should look this way, or I should be more successful, or whatever it is, then I'm going to challenge you, because that is not your voice. It is the voice of society, family, and or culture. It can be all three. But what happened is, in childhood, when we hear these voices over and over and over, both implicitly and explicitly, they become our own voice. Because when we hear something so often and over throughout our lives, we begin believing that it's true. And so when that inner critic full of not good enough stuff is going, we don't question it. We question how we should live our lives based on the garbage that it's telling us, but we don't question whether or not it's true. But that's the first step in learning how to decrease your negative self-talk. Identify where it came from. Was it family, society, culture, maybe even religion, or an accumulation of life experiences that told you were not good enough in whatever way it was? So, identify where those voices first came from. Because when you can identify where those voices came from, then you can start recognizing that maybe that is not actually your voice. Again, it became your voice. It did. And when it became your voice, it also became your identity. But guess what? It never was either of those. It was not your voice. It was not your identity. I promise. That is the truth. So again, identify where those voices came from. Because then when you do that, you can begin to navigate the origin of those, which then allows you to recognize that, maybe that voice is not actually mine. And if it's not actually your voice, then maybe that voice that became your identity is also not your identity. So think about all the ways that those voices shaped your identity. What are they? Yeah, think on that for a minute. The reason that I'm talking about this is because the majority of people are living their lives based on those voices from family, society, and culture that told them who they were or who they were not, but overall that they were not good enough. And so question where the voices came from, to then recognize that that is not your voice, and then to be able to recognize that not only is it not your voice, that it's also not your identity. But I do want to discuss this, because what can happen very often when people begin doing this work is that when you can recognize that that is that inner critic telling you all that not good enough stuff is not your voice and whose it is, then you're left with a lot of times, well, then what is my voice? And that is not an easy question to answer. But just know, if your first step, and you stay at the first step of just identifying whose voices those are, that's okay to stay there, because that alone is beginning the process within your mind for your not good enough stuff to see that those voices are not true, because they are not your voice. And so that can be enough work there for now. But if you can do that and you want to kind of move to the next step, then the next step would be If those are not my voices, those are the voice of society, family, culture, whatever you have named, then what is my voice? Now, that is not an easy question to answer. And trust me, it took me many years to be able to identify what my voice actually was. And I will also say, even though it took me a long time, I was still healing throughout the process. But not only that, this is not okay, I've learned this process and I've done that and I'm good to go. That inner critic is gone. No more not good enough stuff for me. Wouldn't that be fabulous? But, it just doesn't work that way. And that's one thing you will learn about me. I don't bullshit. I don't sugarcoat. I say it like it is. And so I'm going to say it like it is now. The inner critic doesn't ever go away completely. That's just the truth. Because when you've had something your entire life that you have heard over and over and over and that you have grown accustomed to hearing, it doesn't just disappear. It doesn't just go away. Making it go away is not the goal. What is the goal? The goal is learning to identify that voice or the voices that you are hearing of your not good enough stuff from your inner critic is not your true voice, and to see where those voices came from, to then recognize it's not yours. And after that is when you can begin identifying, then what is my voice? So again, that is not an easy question to answer. And it takes time to really identify what your voice is. That's something that can grow and change and shape throughout the rest of your life. But throughout the entire process, I promise you're still healing. But let me give you an example of one of the voices that still pops back into my head, because I continue to do this work because, like I said, it pops back up, and the goal is to learn how to identify the voices and decrease them and turn the volume down. And doing that allows you to start recognizing them more quickly. So this is a voice that popped up in my head just a few months ago because my son was going through some difficult experiences where he was not being treated fairly. He was being discriminated against for some things. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, I don't want to cause more problems. I don't want to make things worse. I don't want to be that mom. I don't want people to think that I caused trouble. And that voice was loud for several weeks. And, that was kind of my identity. And so I kept my mouth shut. I didn't say anything until I started thinking, whoa, wait a minute. Okay, whose voice is that? Because it's sure as hell not my voice. Not anymore. It used to be for many years. So whose voice is it? Well, for me, it's families. It's society. And it's culture telling me that I shouldn't ruffle any feathers, that I should, keep my opinions to myself if it might, upset somebody or if it might cause problems, that I should be quiet, that, just make sure I don't stir up any trouble. So I identified where those voices came from to then be able to say, whoa, that is absolutely not my voice. So if that was not my voice, the next question I had to answer is, then what is my voice in this situation? My voice in that situation is that I will be heard. I will not play small. I will speak up when my son or anybody I love or anybody I need to advocate for is being harmed. I will be heard. I will make sure that somebody knows I do not stand for that somebody knows I am going to fight if needed. to make sure this doesn't continue. And I do not care if others don't like it. I do not care if anybody thinks I am causing problems, because guess what? I wasn't causing problems. I was not the problem. My son was not the problem. The problem was the people who were harming my child. But think about that. Is that what you were taught? Stay quiet? Keep the peace? I was. But I don't do that anymore because I can identify where those voices came from. I can see that those are not my voices, that I don't believe that. I can identify what my voice is and attach that to my true soul identity of having a strong, powerful voice when I need to speak up for others, to advocate for them and make sure I am heard and that change can happen. So that is what the process looks like. And again, I've been doing this work for many years and it still will pop up for me. Doesn't mean that I'm not healing, doesn't mean that I'm a failure, doesn't mean that, I'm going backwards. What it means is that those voices were so strong for so many years that they're going to pop up. And that's when I get to pause myself to remind myself of the work that I can continue doing and that I need to continue doing. So I really hope that you can take this process and begin identifying the voices of your not good enough stuff, to then recognize that that is not your voice and it is not your identity, to eventually be able to determine what is your voice, what is your identity, and what will you do with your true soul identity's voice and just your true soul identity. That gives you power. And trust me, you always deserved to have power. And no matter what, you are good enough. You always were, and you always will be. So if it's hard for you to tell that to yourself, that's okay. It's not an easy thing to do. But say it anyway, because at some point, the more you say that, the more little opening starts to get created to where you might start thinking maybe that's not complete bullshit, and maybe there might be an ounce of possibility of that being the truth. And the more you continue reminding yourself that you are good enough, always have been, and always will be, the more and more that can begin to feel like truth. So, if you have any questions about this, just let me know. And again, this is not an easy process. This is not a quick process. But healing is none of that either. There's no ABC, there's no 1, 2, 3, there's no shortcut. But even throughout the process, you are still healing, and that is always the goal. If this episode helped you see yourself differently, I'd love for you to follow my podcast and leave a review. It helps more people discover the Not Good Enough Stuff framework and these conversations. New episodes are released every Tuesday. If you need reminders between episodes to keep questioning the messages that shaped you, follow me on social media at The Inner Child Therapist. You'll also find my blog, newsletter, and free resources at theinnerchildtherapist.com. All of the links are in the show notes. Remember, you are not lost. Your true soul identity is still there. And the voice in your head isn't always yours. Question it. I'll see you next Tuesday.